Vulnerability.
Therapist perception.
Bachelorette.
All right, let's get into reactivity TV. What happened in Bachelor world this week?
Yikes.
Yikes, finale part 2.
Finale part 2. Yes, I know that there is so much to unpack. And I think it's important that, especially as we are digging into this week's reactivity TV discussion, that we again give a disclaimer that we're really just reacting to and discussing what is portrayed to us on the show, that we acknowledge it's an edited TV show, that we don't know the full picture, and we're not making an assessment of the actual people, but more what we're seeing on our screens as we're watching.
We're pulling these different themes and patterns that we see in the show that we also see in real life. And it's just our therapist take on what we're seeing.
Yes. And so the finale part 2 was a doozy, like perhaps, in fact, most dramatic finale ever.
I think they were right about that this time. They weren't playing around.
It did not oversell it this year. Yeah, it was tough to watch, I'll say. And I had a lot of opinions. But for the sake of our conversation, I want to, again, from that therapist perspective, we are showing up as objectively as we possibly can, and also having space for empathy for these people who are navigating through really stressful things. So yeah. I feel like we have to talk about the biggest elephant in the room from the finale, which was Rachel and Tino, and Tino's cheating.
Yeah. I mean, that was a twist for sure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more dramatic parts about that, did not see that part coming.
Mm-hmm.
And is certainly something we see in real life. So it's a great topic for us to dig into in general.
Yeah, and I guess, I think one of the both benefits and challenges in being a therapist is that it's not actually our role to take a side. In fact, that's pretty detrimental to the work, especially when we're working with more than one person. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of frame this discussion or my thoughts about this discussion from that place of really having a lot of empathy for both Rachel and Tino in experiencing this betrayal in their relationship. Tino did exhibit a betrayal of trust in the relationship, and that's not up for debate, so to speak. But what I really wanted to talk about was the way in which they navigated through that experience as a couple, and how we as therapists maybe might frame or conceptualize cheating within a relationship. And there's a lot of frameworks when the concept of cheating comes up, and one of them is that cheating can be seen, or infidelity can be seen, as a symptom of maybe a greater issue going on within a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that can be really, really helpful in a couple navigating through this is, well, I guess on some level, a willingness to kind of discuss it, understand it, and work through it, maybe, right? And that was something that it didn't feel like was present when Tino and Rachel were having this conversation. It didn't seem like they were approaching the problem. It didn't seem like they were approaching the problem. It seemed like they were approaching one another as if they were the problem. And it seems
right, which is so hard to do, one, on national television live, and when Jesse Palmer is your therapist, your unlicensed therapist. I mean, that's hard for any couple to do, to get out of what they're feeling, what their reactions are to something, and actually look at it as something outside of them, rather than making each other the problem, looking at the problem as the problem. And that's really, really hard to do, especially in the case of infidelity. Certainly not impossible to do, but really difficult to do without the resources or the help to get there.
Right. And I think another big piece of what, again, so much empathy. My heart was like breaking watching them like hash this out live on national TV. Like, but I also think in a lot of ways they were kind of set up for failure. Like in any relationship, of course, you need to have good communication skills, and having a foundation of some sort of trust, or just a foundation in a relationship that's solid, is so important when you're navigating through difficulty. And infidelity can be so challenging to navigate through. And Rachel and Tina were not only brand new, barely knew each other, but it seemed like they had already been experiencing kind of a rocky patch where the relationship was really fragile and insecure. And so it's not necessarily surprising that they weren't able to work through this as a couple, because the relationship sounded like it was already fracturing.
Right. And the details of that may have been left out for us, and kudos to them for keeping some of their lives private. So the actual, like, if we're talking symptoms of the infidelity, the actual symptoms, we don't know what those are. All we saw was what was being played out, and it makes sense how people could then draw conclusions and have judgments and pick sides. But we don't have all those details, unfortunately, that could help them understand and help us understand.
Right. It is so tempting to pick a side, but you're right in that we don't have enough information to even know really what happened.
Right. And then they just got caught in this loop, this back and forth, where it sounded like, as Tina would try to explain what was going on for him, that what Rachel heard was, you're making an excuse, you're trying to justify what you did, and you're not remorseful for it. And then they got back right to the beginning. No, I'm owning up to it, and this and this, and oh no, you're not owning up to it. And so it just was back and forth, and they weren't going to get out of that.
Right. They were really, really spinning their wheels in that. And I think the truth probably is that they both weren't emotionally ready to have that intense of a conversation. They really were understandably reacting really emotionally in that moment. And so as a result, when we're reacting emotionally, it's really hard to hear and to listen and to understand. And while it was really disruptive and it seemed to really frustrate and hurt Rachel that Tino kept leaving, there is an element of I can understand, like, being in a state of overwhelm or desperation and wanting getting up and leaving as a way to regulate yourself as a strength. But it seems like they both had a really hard time grounding themselves in what was a really difficult conversation. And that's important in any relationship, to be able to have the individual tools and skills to be able to regulate when things get hard emotionally.
Their individual skills and their skills as a couple, but like you said, they didn't have any time to develop their skills as a couple, because everything was so fresh and everything, and they might have had this title of engaged, but I mean, what did that mean? Because they just didn't have the time. They didn't have the experience together to make something strong.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I know one thing that you had wanted to talk about today was communication in general, and maybe that's a good segue to pivot to your moment.
Yeah, well, so similar to the fact that something had come out between Tino and Rachel, something had come out between Gabby and Eric. And the difference there, well, I mean, other than the content of it, the difference that I was that I was taking away from it was that he had been upfront with her and they had worked through this at length together,
Mhm.
even before it surfaced through the media. And I was thinking about, okay, well, in real life, okay, how would this, play out? It's talking to your partner about something that you think is important for them to know, um, bef- not only before they are found out or before somebody gets to them first, but really just to have an avenue where you feel comfortable explaining yourself and um uh, uh yeah, just having this area of your relationship that is safe and productive. It sounds like they really did have a bunch of productive conversations around it. They looked like the happiest couple alive up there last night. So that was a strength that they had for sure.
Yeah, well, and as you're talking, it's making me kind of like, again, like I hate to compare, but when you have two similar-ish situations, it's hard not to. But it seems like the way that Tino and Rachel showed up in their conversations, and perhaps like the betrayal was bigger, but it was self-preservation, where it seemed like when Eric approached Gabby, it was relationship preservation, that the goal of him telling her was, I care about this relationship and I want to preserve it and protect it, and so I'm telling you this. Whereas it seemed like the communication or conversation that Rachel and Tino were having were about, like, how do I protect and preserve myself?
Well, and now as you're saying that, I'm thinking about what had played out between Rachel and Avon. It's the same thing, that she had this need to preserve herself when it came to that influence from her friends and family, as opposed to preserving the relationship, as opposed to, ooh, there's this disconnect here, or how can we work on this? I'm now needing to protect myself.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard for a relationship to survive without the we in it, you
Mm-hmm,
know?
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it really speaks to, again, the foundation that Rachel and Gabby have built, that this is now the second that we've seen, second challenge that they've been able to navigate through. And it seems
Oh,
like,
Gabby and
yeah,
Eric.
oh, sorry, Gabby and Eric, apologies. But sometimes these ruptures can, and the repair that happens after can help to really deepen a relationship. And it seems like, at least what we're seeing, right? It seems like that's what's happening for Gabby and Eric, is that it's drawing them closer together. But one other thing that I just wanted to bring up, because I know that this comes up a lot in our work, is the concept of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And so Rachel's journey this season was such a great example of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that throughout the entire season, from episode 1, she is feeling and expressing how unworthy she feels to be the Bachelorette, how insecure she feels about it, how she's really worried that she'll end up at the end with no one. And we see the way that each week she lets that insecurity kind of like live within her and permeate through so many of her interactions. And then at the very end, where she left with this, it completely, her behavior completely validated her fear. And again, I have such deep empathy for Rachel in just how kind of like devastating this must have been for her, but how in a lot of ways she was her own worst enemy, because like her insecurity really ruled the roost for her.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a great point. Um, Sometimes when we're so focused on the potential of something failing or the potential of something not going the way that we really want it to, we're focused on that so much more than the outcome that we do want, that that other one, we're really working towards that other one in some way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And I think what, as a viewer, it can make it challenging. It was challenging to kind of empathize with Rachel at times. Was that it felt as though she wasn't paying attention to the things that were going well. And so I guess if I were to suggest to anyone who's having trouble with that in navigating through like that self-sabotage or self-fulfilling prophecy type experience, that like to learn from what Rachel didn't do, which was to also look for examples or for experiences or evidence to support the opposite is true. You know, she had so much, she had 10 guys that really, really wanted to be there with her. She had people that were saying the words, you know, I see a future with you. And I think she was maybe a little too unconsciously, subconsciously committed to I'm not going to get what I want or get what I need, that she wasn't really able to see that she missed out on some opportunities there. And so like my encouragement to anyone who might be struggling with some of that is to really make sure that you're evaluating the evidence fully, and not just picking at pieces that support your narrative. That wraps up this season of The Bachelorette.
But certainly more to come with Bachelor in Paradise.
Bachelor in Paradise starts next week, which I have a lot more fun with. So I'm excited to talk about that with you next week.
I think it'll be refreshing and fun.
Cool.